Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and the 9.3 test server was just released yesterday and I've rushed to bring you the balance changes that will be up and coming in the next major addition to World of Tanks. I've played all of the brand new tanks such as this M41 Walker Bulldog and I plan to make videos on them to highlight their strengths and their weaknesses so you can be fully prepared for the next iteration of the game. This video, however, will be focused on bringing you up to date with the balance changes that will be coming to some of the most powerful tanks in the current version of the game. So before we go and take a look at the balance changes, let's just take a look at the tank eye candy and see the models which have been reworked to HD for 9.3. So firstly, the most widely produced Soviet tank of World War II, the T-34. Next up, the tank with arguably the best frontal armor in the game, the IS-7. It's worth noting that this Soviet beauty, for some reason, has had the machine gun folded down. Looks a bit alien to me, and oh, please, Wargaming, put the machine gun back up. This tank is definitely not as iconic as it was with that. Take a look at the front with the headlights and this cable that's wrapped across the armor. Next up is a tank destroyer, one of the most powerful entries at Tier 8, the ISU-152 with the very fearsome BL-10. And this is definitely not a position that you want to be in with the ISU-152. Next up, a little American light tank, the M5 Stuart, is now in full HD glory. One of the most controversial tanks in the game, the M3 Lee, is also getting reworked. Doesn't make me want to play it anymore though, that's for sure. Here's the Jagdpanther, one of the tanks that a lot of people get into the game, and it's never looked better than it will do in 9.3. Now let's start the balance changes with the one that requires the most detail, the KV-1S. So let's start with probably the strongest tank that there ever has been at Tier 6, the KV-1S. Now the KV-1S has been changed from Tier 6 to Tier 5. In its place is the KV-85, which as many of you will see, looks remarkably similar to what the KV-1S looked like. Now what made the KV-1S special was the 122mm. The fact that it was a highly mobile tank with 390 alpha damage, which would shave off half the health off any equal tiered tanks and almost one-shot quite a few tanks such as Tier 4 and Tier 5 that it could meet. The rate of fire on the gun has been nerfed to 3 rounds a minute, which is very comparable to, for example, the 155mm that is on a Tier 9 tank destroyer, which will do 750 alpha damage. Now, while the rate of fire on the KV-1S wasn't particularly brilliant before, it is very slow now. And if you want to continue to use this 122mm on the KV-1S replacement, the KV-85, then you're going to have to try and dictate the pace of combat, otherwise you're going to struggle to be able to dish out the damage effectively. Now the penetration characteristics of this gun remain unchanged, as well as the alpha damage, but the accuracy has been nerfed to 0.5. This means at mid to long ranges that the KV-85 will not be as effective with this 122mm as the KV-1S was. In addition, the aim time has been nerfed to 3.6 seconds. Moreover, we can see that the top speed limit of the KV-1S, as it has become the KV-85, has been reduced to 34 kilometers an hour. And finally, the gun depression on this tank has been reduced from 8 degrees to 3 degrees. It's not all bad news, however, as there is a 100mm gun that has been added to the vehicle that is very competitive indeed. With 250 alpha damage, 7.89 rounds a minute, 170mm of penetration, and the aim time and accuracy, which is not too bad, this gun can really rip its opponents to shreds a lot faster than you would do over time than the 122mm. All in all, the new KV-1S, the KV-85, is slower, and if it chooses to use the 122mm, it is much less flexible indeed than the KV-1S was. In my opinion, this is a great change. The KV-1S was completely overpowered at Tier 6, and I think this will help return some of the balance to the Tier 6 matchmaker. So if you're wondering where the KV-1S has gone, don't worry, it is still in the game. But now it is at Tier 5. It has the same mobility that it once had, but its turret has been made weaker and it's unable to use that 122mm. Nevertheless, that 122mm has been replaced with a different one. This gun has a whopping rate of fire of 5.17 rounds a minute, with 450 alpha damage if you can penetrate its low penetration HE shells. And if you choose to spend 4,800 credits, you can have 140mm of heat penetration that will do 370 damage at tier 5? Now the accuracy on this gun is completely garbage, 0.58, and the aim time is not very good at all, it's at 2.9. So it's definitely going to take you a long time to be able to aim and to hopefully hit that huge amount of alpha damage. But when you consider the rate of fire and the fact that this is a tier 5, this is a simply ridiculous gun to have on a vehicle. Now while this gun has been in the game on the KV-1, the fact of the matter is that the KV-1 is a very slow and immobile heavy tank. The KV-1S, on the other hand, at tier 5, has 10 degrees, that's 50% more track traverse, as well as being lighter and having 100 more horsepower on its engine. Slightly higher hit points, and this is a really big one that not many people recognize, 30 meters extra view range. The only downside to the KV-1S compared to the KV-1 is that you do have a weak point on top of the turret, and the turret armor on the side and the rear is weaker. However, after doing some testing, I feel that this tank will be just as much, if not more of a bully at tier 5 than it previously was at tier 6. Especially so if the characteristics of the tank stay the same throughout the test iterations. A lot of you will be wondering, if you have a KV-1S, well, what tanks will I have next patch? Well, when I logged into the test server, I had the KV-85, but I had to buy the KV-1S. So we'll see what happens with regards to that. For all you people who hate getting held in place by this little bastard of a tank, rejoice. The FV304 is getting nerfed. The traverse speed of the tank has been reduced to 22 degrees. And in addition, Wargaming are reducing its capability to cross medium terrain by 8%, which should slow it down when it's off-road. Moreover, the aiming time has been increased to 4.8 from 4.5, and the reload time has been nerfed a little bit, so it now only fires 4.44 rounds a minute. So I think most of you are probably going to love those changes, but there will be a few of you who are also going to hate them. Moving on, the Hellcat has received a nerf in 9.3. The dispersion of the turret while you're on the move has been dramatically increased by 57%. So this means that when you go forwards and backwards and turn the tank from left to right, your aiming circle is going to get much bigger indeed. Moreover, the dispersion caused by turret traverse is increased by 25% as well. So that means it's going to take longer for the Hellcat to aim at its targets after it's been on the move. It would also make firing on the move a lot less accurate in this vehicle. It should be noted as well that the rate of fire of this 90mm has been nerfed to 7.06 rounds a minute. And finally, the mobility of this tank has been nerfed. The crossing capacity on all types of terrain has been nerfed by 10 to 17%. And this is probably one of the biggest changes. The maximum reverse speed has been changed from 20 to 12. All in all, the Hellcat will be less competitive next patch, but boy, was it an absolutely brutal vehicle in this one. I played a couple of games in this tank on the test server, and it's still an absolute beast with the nerfs. Next up is one of the most complicated series of changes, and it is to the M24 Chaffee. Well, firstly, we should highlight that the model is in HD now. And it is still at tier 5, so don't worry, it hasn't gone the way that, for example, the MT25 did and the VK2801 did when it got bumped up to tier 6. However, this has come at quite a cost. The traverse speed has been nerfed by 4 degrees a second, and the tank's amazing ability to be super accurate even on the move has been crippled, as the dispersion will be increased by 80% upon movement. The horsepower of the top engine has also been reduced from 500 to 460. But the weight of the tank has gone down from 20 tons to 18.69 when you use this loadout. So not too much of a big deal there, as the weight loss will sort of counteract the nerf to the horsepower of the engine. One of the biggest changes to the Chaffee is that the repair cost of this vehicle has been reduced by 61%. While in 9.2 this was a very expensive tank to run because of that, in 9.3 it'll be a lot cheaper for you. But that's probably because they've reduced the hit points from 580 to 440. That's a massive change. This tank can now be one-shot by most of the 390 alpha damage guns, maybe 3 times out of 10. That's going to be remarkably frustrating. Whereas previously this little tank could take a hit from an IS-7 almost all the time. Next patch is going to be able to take that hit almost none of the time. So all in all, bad news so far, but one of the best changes to the vehicle is the fact that the top speed limit has been dramatically increased from 56 kilometers an hour to 77.2 kilometers an hour. That means the Chaffee is no longer a mid-range with regards to speed little toy tank. It truly is a very fast light vehicle. And that will definitely change the playstyle of the Chaffee and give it a lot more flexibility. But this again has come at a cost, because this tank can no longer get the 76mm. The alpha damage has been reduced from 115 to 110. The penetration has fallen by 41mm with its standard ammunition. And the rate of fire, even though the alpha damage has gone down, has fallen to 17.14 rounds a minute, from 18.18 rounds a minute. Now the tank is slightly more accurate, but its aim time is worse. It should be noted as well that the penetration of the premium rounds of this vehicle have been reduced by 42mm. All in all, I would say that the Chaffee has had its claws completely removed. Now, while it's still maybe going to be able to surprise lightly armored tanks, you're no longer, as an example, going to be able to punish the sides of E75s in this vehicle. You won't be able to go through the fronts of many tanks that you were previously. If this wasn't enough, the gun depression of the tank has also been nerfed from 10 degrees to 7 degrees, and the view range has been reduced by 10 meters. Now, while you can call this a rebalancing because the tank has obviously gained a lot of top speed, it has lost everything else that made this tank special. The M24 Chaffee has been, in my opinion, crippled. It will be not very interesting next patch. It'll play like a run-of-the-mill Tier 5 or Tier 4 light tank, and there will be far more exciting light tanks to play. Now I'm going to run over quickly the changes to the M5 Stuart. The crossing capacity of its tracks has been reduced by 12% on medium and soft terrain, and its traverse speed has been nerfed from 45 to 42. However, a bit like the Chaffee, the top speed limit has been increased from 58 to 64.4 kilometers an hour. Dispersion on turning the turret has been increased, which will make it harder for the tank to aim quickly, but the tank's previous 20mm has been changed to a 37mm autoloader. But the 75mm howitzer has been removed from the vehicle, which was one of the things that made this tank quite special. Nevertheless, this new autoloader should provide you with some fun, and if you can engage lightly armored targets, you will rip them up very quickly indeed. Now, moving on to the T18. Undoubtedly one of the most ridiculously overpowered vehicles in the game, which I have no interest in playing ever again past this one battle. Finally, Wargaming have nerfed what was one of the most ridiculous tanks in 9.2. The traverse speed has been nerfed from 30 degrees to 22 degrees, and the crossing capacity of these tracks has been nerfed heavily on hard terrain. This also applies to medium terrain with 40% and soft terrain by 12%. This means that the T18 is going to turn a hell of a lot slower than it did previously, which will allow tanks the chance to get away from the front of this vehicle, get away from its frontal 51mm of armor and one shotgun, which will finally allow people to outplay the T18. Furthermore, the reverse speed of the tank has been nerfed from 8 to 6 kilometers an hour. Now the 75mm has been nerfed, the rate of fire has been changed from a reload of 4.8 seconds to 5.2. And the dispersion for turning the gun has been nerfed as well. All in all, brilliant changes to the T18. This thing was so ridiculously overpowered that people would buy it and play game after game after game just to basically stomp on beginners, which would make playing all of your low tier tanks much less fun and very more dangerous. Now, while the tank's amazing 75mm is still in the game with a slight rate of fire and dispersion nerf, the main thing is that you will now be able to run circles around a T18, giving you an outplay mechanic to one of the most dangerous vehicles at Tier 3. Moving along, one of the most powerful vehicles at Tier 10, the T57 Heavy, has received a nerf this patch. The dispersion on the move has been increased by 25%, and also for turning the hull by 25%, and for turning the turret by 29%. In addition, the aim time has been changed from 2.7 to 2.9. When you factor both of these things in, it takes this tank a hell of a lot longer to aim than it previously did. If you think back to before patch 9.2, the AMX-50B had 3 seconds aim time. So if you played that tank before the buffs, in 9.2, where it received 2.5 seconds aim time, you will get an idea of how long it will take to aim with the T57 Heavy. Now, while this doesn't have an effect to the T57's brutal capability to dish out the punishment in close to mid-range combat, and the rate of fire and the time between one shell unloading remains unchanged, which is ridiculously powerful, the T57 Heavy will find it much harder to engage its targets at mid to long ranges, or at least to engage them accurately. I think that's a great change to this vehicle. It needs to be mid to short range, and it simply shouldn't be able to put pinpoint accurate shots into its target every 2 seconds, crippling them at mid to long ranges. It's worth mentioning that the Tier 10 American artillery, the T92, has received some buffs. The dispersion on the move has been reduced by 11%, and on turning the hull by 11%, and the crossing capacities have all been increased on terrains by 17%, 14%, and 17% respectively. So there's never been a better time to get into the biggest gun in the game. If you choose to play your IS with the 100mm rather than the 122mm, then it's going to be good news for you in 9.3. The aiming time has been buffed by 0.2. The rate of fire has been dramatically increased to 7.89 rounds a minute. The accuracy has been buffed to 0.38, which means that if you don't want to use the 122mm on this tank, there is another competitive option. What this means is it's going to play out a lot like having that 100mm on the previous tank, the KV-85. And when we look at it, in fact, it performs exactly the same as if you mount this on a Tier 6 Heavy, which doesn't sound very impressive at all. I think you're still better to go with the 122mm on the IS, irrelevant of the buffs to the 100, which kind of just roll over from the KV-85 rather than trying to become relevant on the IS itself. One of the least popular Tier 10 medium tanks in the game, the Object 430, is receiving a buff next patch. The dispersion on turning the turret is being reduced by 25%, but the accuracy on the gun is taking a hit for that. It's becoming 0.38, whereas previously it was 0.35. But, however, check out the rate of fire on this gun, 9.38 rounds a minute. And what that means is that next patch, the Object 430 will leapfrog the Object 140, the T62A, and the King of the Hill, the SDB-1, to become the highest DPM medium tank in the game. It will be the first one to breach 3000 DPM. But remember, it does come at the cost of having very poor gun depression, having pretty bad aim time for a Tier 10 medium, and having quite poor accuracy as well. But if all you wanted is raw power and frontal armor, then there will be no better medium tank in the game for you than the Object 430 in patch 9.3. All in all, I think this is a fantastic change. A tank which was very run-of-the-mill and didn't really have anything going for it apart from its frontal armor is certainly going to be the best at something. So there have been a couple of other big changes. Firstly, that there will not be engine fires for a certain number of vehicles when their transmission is hit. So it'll be very much easier to list the tanks that are non-German that this applies to. The Object 263, the Tier 8 American tank destroyer, the T28, the Japanese Type 61 and the SDA-1, as well as the British Tier 10 tank destroyer, the FV215B183. And on the other hand, the German tanks. Practically every big German tank in the game gets set on fire repeatedly when it gets hit in the front of the tank. Next patch, rejoice! Your transmission might be hit, but it's not going to set you on fire. Plus, practically every light tank Tier 4 and 5 plus in the game is having its track durability increased. This will mean that you have your tracks blown off less when you're bombing it around. And that means more mobility and less you getting completely destroyed. So enjoy that. So there are a few other changes that I just want to talk about quickly. The design of the garage, as you can see, is reworked. There is now a Create a Platoon button. You now have a player account up the top, so you can check your service record more obviously. All of the messages that you sent me no longer blink along the bottom. Your gold, credits, and your free experience are more obvious at the top. And all in all, we're just seeing UI improvements to the garage. This is what the new Platoon window looks like. We can see the empty slots, invite players. It's just very much more professional. Also, one thing I want to talk about is that in 9.3 there will be new features to promote fair play. If players consistently give up on the battle and leave before their tank is destroyed, they'll be greeted with a warning message whether they actually want to desert the battle or not. Apparently, after a certain number of these violations, the player will be fined an equal amount of income to the battle that was abandoned, which can mean that you will get no experience credits or bonuses for missions, medals, or marks of excellence. There are new measures to prevent people idling in the battle. If you're consistently inactive in the game, you will receive a warning. And if you repeat this, you're going to earn no credits and no experience for the battle. Furthermore, if you've got suicidal tendencies, you're going to have to watch out in 9.3 because there are going to be measures to prevent self-destruction. If you regularly destroy your vehicle, you're going to be issued with a warning and you're going to be penalized with credits and experience. Great news all round. There's nothing worse than having AFK people on your team that lead to just a very unfair battle. As well as players who are more than happy to just give up and quit because maybe they didn't get into a matchup that they wanted, or maybe the game didn't go how they wanted. Or the kind of player who wants to deny you that kill by suiciding. Watch out, scumbags, Wargaming's coming for you. So Wargaming have stated that they've added a bonus to combat experience which rewards vehicle non-penetration / ricochet, which is applicable only when an enemy shell hits the vehicle's hull, but it does not reduce its HP. Now I'm very worried about this because the amount of damage that you can do is limited by the amount of hit points on the enemy team, whereas the amount of damage that you can take is only limited by the amount of ammunition that they have. Even without trying to get the enemy to shoot you to elevate your damage blocked by armor, it's very easy to get maybe 8,000 damage blocked in a mouse, or I've seen ridiculous T95 games where they get 20,000 damage blocked. So how on earth are they going to scale this compared to maybe 1,000 damage blocked if you use your Comet perfectly? I think this is kind of rewarding something that a player needs to do to achieve an objective of damaging and killing their opponents. That's like saying that you're going to get rewarded for driving around really quickly in your light tank. Tanks with armor use it to damage their opponents. They don't use it to kind of earn experience. I truly hope that this is rethought or at least justified. I'm very interested about this, and I'll be doing some testing hopefully to try and figure it out. So that's it for this video, which documented the balance and general changes coming in 9.3. I will be doing separate videos on the brand spanking new light tanks with gameplay, so definitely stay tuned to my channel for those. I'll also detail the changes that they've made to Muravanka just to outline them quickly. The map has been rescaled, it's bigger now, gone from 800 to 1,000 meters, and stay tuned for more details about that. So anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider giving it a like down below, it really helps the channel out. And let me know what you think about the changes coming up to all of these tanks. There's going to be so much to talk about in the comments below. Anyway, keep an eye out for my upcoming videos on all of the light tanks, and thank you guys so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.